Welcome to the life you crave. Simple and sustainable weight loss for women who have better things to do than diet. I'm your host, Leah Pinelli. I help ambitious, badass women stop overeating, overworking, and overgiving to lose weight from a place of love. I'll help you simplify weight loss, end your overwhelm, and create the life you crave. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Life You Crave podcast. I am beyond thrilled to have Sherry Shaban on the podcast today. Sherry is a Montreal-based podcaster, YouTuber, fitness and life coach, and she is NSCA certified strength and conditioning specialist, a certified athletic therapist, which I love, an osteopath, and the director of fitness for Rock Thomas's M1 Mastermind. Sherry has over 20 years experience in her specialty, and she is dedicated to a life of helping other people transform their athletic identity to become who they are meant to be. Sherry's passion of helping others through their own health and wellness transformation journey stems from her own trials and tribulations. At the tender age of 16, which we're going to hear all about, Sherry was hit by a car, and the outcome of that accident nearly left her paralyzed. She underwent her first back surgery 1 month before her 17th birthday. The second surgery in 2012 came at a time when she was just opening her first CrossFit gym in Montreal. She was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, where she discovered she was just 2 millimeters away from paralysis. Holy cow, I have such chills just reading that, Sherry. So we are going to dive in to your story. But first, I think it's important to say, I still have chills, by the way, they're not going away. I think it's important to say though here that having a fitness, you are the first fitness professional that I've ever had on the podcast. And it might come as somewhat of a surprise to my audience and definitely my clients, because people who know me know that I am not a proponent of exercise for weight loss. I almost never talk about exercise because I'm a weight loss professional and I don't see it as necessary for that. And in fact, I think it actually causes self-sabotage for women like me. And I have episodes on that, you guys. You could go back and look at the myth of exercise, an earlier episode. Gosh, I think it might've been episode 37, but I might be wrong about that. I'll put it in the show notes. But so it might be surprising because I am not the girl who brings on all of the fitness professionals to talk on the show. But what I want to tell my audience is there's a reason I brought Sherry on. I had the great fortune of being a guest on her podcast. And I know from her work that she and I are incredibly philosophically aligned. And so you are going to love hearing from Sherry today, because she's not me, who is, yes, you guys know me. I love to go on my walks with my dog, and I go to Pilates regularly because I do believe strength training is so important, especially after 40. But what I love about what Sherry is going to contribute today is that her life is, athletic fitness, and she's philosophically aligned with what I teach. And so I think it's going to be a beautiful contribution to what we've talked about in the previous 80 some odd episodes here on the Life You Crave. So welcome, Sherry. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. And you're right. Also, it's a little bit sad, I think, to kind of think about how a lot of fitness trainers really do look at exercise in sort of a different light, or a lot of people who are wanting to release weight are doing it because it's almost as a form of punishment for how they look or how they feel about themselves. But it's not a sustainable reason. It's certainly not an empowering reason to start to engage in exercise. And that's definitely something that we want to differentiate with as well. And the way that I've always looked at exercise was it's just a thing that we do, and it's a thing that we do that makes us feel good. And I think even as women, just to feel empowered, if it's Pilates that makes you feel empowered, if it is running, if it's walking, whatever that is, whatever feels good for you and you enjoy doing, and it's something that you can continue to show up for with love for yourself, then that is the right tool for you.
Oh my gosh, I love that you just said it like that. I've never thought about it like that, but you're right. It's empowering, because so much about forced exercise, when you feel like you have to, it doesn't feel empowering. Like I've told you before, I do not love running. Like running does not feel empowering. It hurts in ways I don't think it should, right? Like I feel terrible when I'm doing it. That is the opposite of empowerment. But you're absolutely right. Like I have a connection to Pilates. When I was in my 20s, I had a connection to kickboxing because it felt so empowering. I felt like I could kick somebody's ass, you know, that felt great.
Yes.
I don't really have that energy anymore. Like I don't, you know, I'm not trying to go out and kick anybody's ass the way I was when I was in my 20s, but you're absolutely right. And I think so often forced exercise is the opposite of empowering, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's back up. Tell us your story. Tell us how you became Sherry Shaban.
Well, I never, I guess, growing up thought that I would be sort of in the health and fitness environment. And actually, I was always involved in sports and I was always good at it. I excelled at swimming when I was a kid. I was, I guess, considered a child athlete. Almost every sport that I engaged in, I was always excelling in it. I remember even in grade school, I was always competing with the boys. I wanted to be faster than them. I wanted to do more push-ups than them. And it probably came from, you know, maybe it was my dad. I think the way that he raised my brothers was always a little bit different than me. And I always had something to prove, or I always felt like I had something to prove. But I was always naturally good at science. And so I studied science, and that was really sort of my pursuit. But when I was 16, I was hit by a car, and that's sort of where everything changed for me. I think it was basketball at that time. I was in basketball season, and I was downtown Lugano, Switzerland with my roommate, and we were crossing the street. We had just gone and done a whole bunch of groceries, and I didn't see the car coming, and I woke up in the hospital. And later when I woke up, I realized I had suffered a concussion, which of course back then they didn't diagnose or talk about. And I thought that was the extent of my injuries. And then when I came back to basketball practice, I started experiencing pain in my right glute. And then it just continued to travel down my leg very intensely. And in just a matter of a few weeks, I was unable to stand on my own and take a shower. I needed assistance. I had to always lie down to shower. I wasn't able to go for walks. And it just was something that was continuing to get worse and worse. And, you know, at that age, 16 years old, nobody around you thought that there was something wrong with your back, or that this was, an injury due to something from the lower back. And so it kind of went on undiagnosed until I finally went to go see a doctor. And I had herniated multiple levels of discs in my lower back, and I needed a surgery to alleviate the pain. So right before my 17th birthday, I had a partial laminectomy, which is when they remove a portion of the vertebra. So it's the part of the spine, to basically make space for the nerve. And so that was my first surgery. And at that point, I was told I should never exercise again. I wasn't allowed to. Wow. If I were to become pregnant later, that would likely mess up my back a little bit more. And that all that I was allowed to do was some light walking on a treadmill because it wasn't weight bearing. And so stepping away from varsity sports and listening to this advice was very devastating for me. It was quite the bitter pill to swallow. And I did listen to this advice for several years, and then found myself just spending time with a very different crowd. I used to spend time with the athletes, and now I'm spending time with people who are partying and starting to engage in those activities and really hating myself through it because I felt so unaligned with what I was doing. I did not feel connected with the identity that I always had. And I definitely wasn't proud of myself for engaging in these activities. And so it came to a point, I was in my early 20s, after several years of doing this, that I was just like, no, this is not me, Leah. I need to change something. I can't continue to go on like this. And at the time I was smoking cigarettes. I've been doing all those things that I when I look back at now, I can't even believe I made those choices, but I'm happy I did because it's just a part of the journey, right?
Yes.
So I walked into the gym. It was the first time I was actually in a gym environment. I was always playing sports before that. And I had no idea what I was doing. At this point in my life, I was in university. I was actually doing my master's degree in chemistry at the time. And I started just copying what I saw around me, whatever exercise I saw, I started doing. And at the time I was constantly suffering from back pain. So I was on pain medications to manage my back pain. I wasn't really able to sit for a long time. I was always needing a place to lie down anytime I left the house. And again, going against my doctor's orders, here I am at the gym engaging in these activities. But after several months of doing that, I noticed that my back pain was a lot less and I stopped taking my medication. And so I was like, oh my God, I can't believe could this even be possible? So I kept doing more of it. I bought a treadmill. I did start running. I was running 5 minutes at a time at first. And I slowly worked my way up to an hour until I was able to start running outside. And that's sort of where it all started. I then dropped out of my master's degree. My parents were very unhappy about that, but I knew that this was my calling. Like there was a reason why I had to discover this. And so I became, I think the word is obsessed with learning everything there is to know about the human body and being able to help others basically overcome what I had. Doctors of advice telling them that they couldn't maybe pursue a particular activity or that they had to stop doing things that they loved, and that there was a way that the body could heal itself, that the body is actually quite resilient. And so that went on for years of me taking courses. I did go back to school and studied exercise science and athletic therapy, and then nutrition, and then just the journey continued until I am where I am today.
Wow. And so how is your back pain now, and your mobility, and how is all of that now?
So it's interesting. Most of the time, I'm unaware that I even have a back problem. And I think this comes down to identity. When it first did happen, Leah, I was, oh, watch my back. Oh, be careful my back. I'm the person with a back pain. I'm the person with a bad back, right? And it was who I was. I'm yes. Sherry, and I have a bad back, right?
Yes.
And then once I started just realizing that, wait a minute, I could actually do a lot more than I thought that I could, or that I was told that I was allowed to do, I then started to shift into, I'm an athlete. I've always been an athlete, and I don't have a bad back, right? And so I do have my days here and there where, if I've done something a little bit too excessively, I've learned over the years that I do still have my limitations. I don't lift heavy weights. I'm very mindful of what I do in the gym. I'm not only in the gym though, but even just how I clean the house or how I do other activities. So I'm always mindful around that. But then I also notice that certain foods that I eat create inflammation for me and then give me back pain. So I'm also mindful around that connection. If I ate something, usually it could be dairy for me. It could be sugar for me. When I have too much of that, that's where I'll experience a little bit of pain. But in general, I walk around totally forgetting or not even aware that that is a block for me.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love so much about what you just said. And of course, the identity piece I know is a huge part of what you teach and what you believe. And it's the same with me, right? This is one of the areas that we're very aligned in that, for me and my clients, we are someone who struggle with weight. I have always struggled with food. I have always struggled with my weight, right? Like, and all of us have these stories of like, for me, it's like, I started when I was 9 and the struggle began and blah, blah, blah. And so then we become someone who, like you said, I'm Sherry, I have a bad back. I'm right. Leah, I struggle with my weight, right? And so what happens so often is then we don't ever see ourselves as someone who has the option to not struggle or has the option to have a strong back, right? So I love that you say that because it is such a huge distinction. And I also, I've had back issues in the past, and I had gone because I had 2 car accidents. I had not been hit by a car the way you had, but I had whiplash twice as a teenager, which caused a series of problems. Plus we have scoliosis in our family, so my whole life, and I had gone to a chiropractor since infancy because of the scoliosis in our family. So everybody goes to the chiropractor. It's just like what you do. If you're a Pinelli, you go to the chiropractor. Anyway, long story short, it wasn't until I was like 38 that I saw a spinal surgeon, one of the best spinal surgeons in the country, because he happens to be the father of a good friend of mine. And he graciously gifted me a consultation because of all my back problems. And I will never forget this, Sherry. He looked at me after he had examined me. He looked at me, and I had been diagnosed at this point with spinal arthritis and all these things, right? All of these problems, all my bad back problems. And he just looked at me and he said, I want you to know there's absolutely nothing wrong with your back. And I was all, what? And he's like, I don't know why anybody told you you have spinal arthritis. I don't think that's true. He's like, yes, you have scoliosis. He's like, the only thing you need to do is strengthen your back. Right. Like, yes, you have scoliosis for sure. We're not going to pretend like you don't. And that's what's causing some of the pain, but like, you just need to strengthen your back. There's nothing. And I remember that was like a new lease on life because I was like, wait, what? This highly reputable person just basically told me that this identity that I'd had for so long wasn't necessary. Mm-hmm. And it felt so good to be free from that, because then it allowed me to pursue other avenues for my back, right? Such as strengthening it. Right. So you had mentioned, I can't help but but kind of dive in now, because you had mentioned how food impacts your pain. And I just interviewed for the show a woman named Tracy Rodriguez, who she is very similar to you, and she specializes in helping people heal chronic back pain in very much the way that a physical therapist would, but from a very different approach. And we did talk a little bit about food and how it's all one system. Right, Sherry? It's like, it's all one system. So tell me a little more about your experience with food and how it impacts not just your pain, but your overall health and well-being, your fitness. Do you fuel your workouts with food? Like, how does it all kind of work and go together?
Right. Yeah. So I love this question. And so what's really important to address, first of all, is that when we're talking about nutrition or quote unquote diet, it's not about, how many calories am I eating, or, what are my macros, because macros is just another diet and it's a more intelligent way of counting calories. Right. Mm-hmm. But instead it's really always around, well, what do I want to create? And more importantly, how do I want to feel? And so I don't want to get into the place where I'm restricting certain foods because I'm really worried about what it's going to look like on my body, or I'm trying to punish myself by restricting. But instead, I just want to really focus on how foods are making me feel. And now diet is not just what we're eating, right? Diet is everything that enters my being. And so that's what I'm watching. That's what I'm listening to. That's the conversations I'm sitting in. It's even my breath. That's all my diet. And that's very much also related with stress. And so whatever stressful things that I watch, whatever stressful environments I'm around, whatever sort of toxic environments I'm around, that also starts to impact my body and impacts how my body processes that food, especially when there's that very tight connection between the gut and the immune system. And so I would always say that it's also very individual for the person. So we number one want to learn our body, because there's no such thing as we all should be eating this or we shouldn't eat that because of whatever reason. There's not we're not trying to stuff ourselves into this mold and we should all exercise the same or we should all eat the same, because if we all did eat the exact same and exercise the exact same, we would still all look very different. Yes. Right. And so we're on this constant search for like the perfect diet or the perfect way to train to get results. And it actually doesn't exist. Because the perfect way, Leah, for you is going to be very different than what it is for me. And the only way we're going to arrive at that place is if we're very in tune with how things make us feel. And so even when I talk a little bit about, I know I'm coming off of your question a little bit, but when I talk about transformation with my athletes, and I also want to get into what I mean by athlete and why I use that word often.
Yes.
We don't want to look at our transformation around how many pounds I want to lose, right? Well, first of all, I don't believe in losing weight. I believe in releasing weight, because releasing is really unloading a lot of stuff. It's unloading traumas, it's unloading mindset, limiting beliefs, all of these things. But whenever we're focusing on releasing weight and we're focusing on a number, it's like submitting your taxes every year. The moment you submit your taxes and you've done all the work and you're done, you stop working on it. And so when we have this vision around how many pounds we want to release and we work hard to do it, first of all, we will do whatever it takes to make that happen, because that's the ultimate outcome that we desire, is X number of pounds, which really doesn't mean much on the scale anyway. It's just a number. But once we're hyper focused on that, the moment that we achieve that goal, no matter how we did it, no matter how extreme it was, no matter how unhealthy it was, no matter what psychological connections that it created for us that don't serve us, the moment we achieve that, we stop working. And so instead, we want to really focus on becoming the person. And when I want to focus on becoming the person, I want to then look at what my lifestyle looks like. And if I'm not sure what that would look like, maybe I could find a mentor. Maybe I could model someone who is doing it and just see what their lifestyle habits are. But again, it comes down to sustainability and how we are feeling. And so sustainability is, can I do this long term? If I remove carbs from my diet, does that even make sense to me? Like, is this something that I could do for the rest of my life? Right? But if I go for a daily walk and it feels good and I connect with nature, that feels really good. Maybe that's sustainable for me. Or I found yoga and that's changed my world, and maybe that's sustainable for me. Or running, whatever it is. Again, it's very, very individual. And so we want to find sustainability, and then we want to connect that with how we feel. If I'm so hyper focused on that number, then I'm not focused on how anything is making me feel. I don't care that I'm not sleeping well. I don't care that I'm feeling restrictions. I just want to get to that number. Right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm focusing on how things make me feel, and I'm starting to be in tune with my body, especially if I've come from a background of chronic pain or a particular condition that I'm trying to overcome, then I just want to start creating that relationship between food and then how my body's responding to it. And so not just the food as we spoke about, but also maybe the conversations. Who am I spending time with? What am I watching? If I'm watching the news and it's always COVID and people are dying, people are all these cases all the time, that's putting me in a hyper stress situation. So that's obviously impacting my health as well. And my health is not just my weight. My health is my joy. My health is my sleep. My health is how ultimately I'm feeling. And so for me, I've noticed in the past that there is a direct link between eating processed foods, which don't serve me particularly, and eating sugar, especially a high amount of sugar, refined sugars, and chronic pain. So if I eat dairy, if I consume large amounts of sugar or processed foods, I do wake up the next morning with inflammation. And so again, just coming to that place where I'm now not focused on my weight, and I get to that place where now I just want to focus on becoming the person. And through this process, starting to connect all of the actions that I'm doing throughout my day with how it's making me feel, how it's making me sleep, the mood that it's giving me, I can start to make choices then based on self-love, based on what serves me the most, and not restrictions because I'm punishing myself for not arriving at that particular number that I'm trying to arrive at, or just how I personally feel about myself, my self-image.
Yes, because what you're saying here is that it's really about feeling good.
Yeah.
Because if it feels good, you'll keep doing it. But so often we do things that make us feel terrible and we're not even aware that it's making us feel terrible. I know for me, when I'm drinking alcohol, and I do drink alcohol, but if I'm having, like, for example, when I go to my family's house, they have wine every night and my parents enjoy really nice red wine. And we have it with the meal. It's this whole, we've talked about this a little bit, the Italian thing, but I've noticed that after I can have, some red wine a few nights, but once it kind of crosses over into 5-6 nights in a row, it's not like drastic. I don't wake up the next morning with a hangover. We just have a couple glasses of wine with a meal. But what I've noticed is that I don't feel as good as when I don't drink at all. And so it can be so subtle sometimes, or like you were saying, you wake up with inflammation. Like, what do you tell people if they're like, Sherry, I have no idea if I have, like, how do I know if I have inflammation? How do I know if I don't feel good? What do you tell them?
Right. Yeah. It's hard to sort of establish that if I'm always experiencing that. Right. And so it's not until I remove things that I will actually start to feel the outcome. And so I want to just specify what removing means. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in absolute goals. So, it's not waking up in the morning and saying, I'm never drinking again. That's it. Right. It's over. Right. Right. And just, I'm never having carbs again, or, okay, starting Monday, I'm never this again. Right. Yeah. That is such an absolute goal. And it creates a lot of pressure on ourselves for an outcome. And generally it's a punishment. The way that we set that up is a punishment, right? It's a must. It's I have to. And then when I don't achieve it, I ultimately feel like a failure because I didn't do it. I wasn't committed enough. I wasn't disciplined enough. And well, if I failed here and then I try another thing and I fail in the same way, then the only feedback I ever get is that this never works for me. So instead, I encourage anyone to just be curious. What would happen if I removed alcohol for 28 days? What would happen? I'm not saying I'm going to remove it or ultimately forever or not, but I'm just curious. What would happen if I removed sugar for 28 days? And so that's sort of how I've always viewed these changes and these habits. I like to call them habits because ultimately what we do want to create is that identity, which is an accumulation of habits, and habits is what creates our character. So it's kind of started like that. What would happen if I removed this? What would happen if I removed that? And let me see. And then if nothing happened after 28 days, then I won't remove it. But if all of a sudden I realize my bloating stopped, or I feel so much better, I've been sleeping so much better, my workouts are great, I feel very rested, I have so much energy, even my pooping feels great, right? Like all of the things feel great. Then I've got better feedback. And now coming to that decision is very different. I love how this feels. Now it's a decision that I'm going to make out of love. And when I do make that decision, it also still doesn't have to be absolute. I will do more of this and less of that. I will minimize that. But ultimately, my choice to removing these things is because I know what back pain feels like. I had to stop for so many months whenever I would get these flare-ups of back pain. There was this one summer, I think it was 2014, And I remember that summer I was eating a lot of sugar. I was eating a lot of processed foods and things like that. It was the summertime, everyone was barbecuing, and I had gone to the gym. I did a very big workout, and then I came home and I was cleaning the house. And after I was done mopping the floors, I saw that there was a couple drops of water on the floor. So I bent down, Leah, to just wipe the water, and boom, my back went out. And then that lasted months. That was the whole entire summer. So for me, when my back is out, it literally means I'm folded forward and crooked and spasmed in that way, and I cannot straighten up. And so also my work requires me to show up and be there. So during those 4 months, I was running a gym. My kids were young. I was useless to my kids. I couldn't coach. I had to get replacements. I couldn't take on clients. I couldn't treat anyone. I was for 4 months just recovering from this back pain. So that's my measure of, is it worth it, right? Is it worth it to endure that much pain and to be in that state of inflammation and that state of spasm? Or do I love myself so much that this is what I prefer, and I can just be creative around what I want to eat. I can be creative around the treats that I want to make for myself. And then ultimately, again, my choice, me choosing how I feel and wanting to always feel pain-free and feel energetic and feel light and amazing is always what I would choose over, let's say, a restriction.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that. And I know that what you're talking about the curiosity, that is key in my work as well, where it's like, it's not, because my clients often tend to be, and I bet yours are often too, but my clients tend to be all or nothing thinkers, right? Like either I'm eating carbs or I'm not eating carbs.
Right.
Either I'm drinking alcohol or I'm not drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
Either I'm on a diet or I'm off the wagon. And so it's that idea of like, let's just, that line of thinking has not worked thus far. So
Right.
like, let's just let that go and let's try curiosity instead, because curiosity leads to data. And I think you, with being a scientist, right? Like collecting that data is fascinating, because what it does, in my experience, is when I have the data, then I can make informed, data-driven decisions, as opposed to feeling confused. Because when we're confused, I know for me, I've got a lot of digestive issues, IBS and all the things. And I kept hearing myself every weekend saying, I don't feel good. And it was like, I don't feel good. I was constantly saying, I don't feel good. And mommy doesn't feel good. And I hated saying mommy doesn't feel good, because that means that my kid is asking me to do something and I like have to lie down on the couch because I don't feel good. And I don't want to, speaking of identity, I don't want to be that mom who always doesn't feel good. Right. And so it's like, I need to get curious about why I always don't feel good on the weekends.
Right.
And it's because I tend to drink more on Friday night. It's like Friday night, happy hour. And then mommy doesn't feel good. And again, I didn't have a hangover. It wasn't so blaringly obvious. It was just like, my tummy kind of doesn't feel good. And that's because coming from that place of love, like you're talking about, I had to remove alcohol for a while to really see that no, having more alcohol than what I think I should be able to have is actually causing digestive issues that are surfacing as mommy doesn't feel good. And it's just a choice at that point. Do I want to be mommy doesn't feel good so I can have an extra glass of wine? Or do I want to just like limit it to a cup, like one or two, and then take breaks, tomorrow night, so that I never have to hear myself say mommy doesn't feel good unless mommy actually has a cold or something, so it really did feel good, because then what it felt like was I get both. I get to enjoy, a happy hour on a Friday night, but I also know where my limit is. Right. And the limit feels like love, just like with children, Sherry, right? Where it's like, we draw boundaries with children because we actually know that that's how they feel contained and supported in structure, and not just having a free for all. Like, we know that humans thrive when they know where the boundaries are, but they also have lots of freedom within the boundaries. Right. And so I love what you're talking about. And I also love that you were referring to it as becoming the person. Right. In my group, I have a VIP group, and we do this work. We actually have these goals called Becoming Someone Who goals. So my goal is to become someone who, doesn't stress eat anymore. My goal is to become someone who exercises 4 days a week. My goal is to become someone who isn't afraid to speak up at work. So it's like, I call them two-legged goals, because a lot of times our food and eating behaviors are parallel. I'll give you an example. I have a client who she's had this dream of starting her own business forever, and she sabotages herself. She gets an idea and then she sabotages. She gets another idea. She sabotages herself. She doesn't make progress. She does the same exact thing with food and weight, right? She knows what she needs to do and she sabotages herself. And so our work together has been around sabotage, right? And why we sabotage ourselves. And it is work. So she has food and weight goals, food behavior goals is what I call them. But she also has life ambition goals. And they run parallel, because I want to become someone who owns my own business and doesn't struggle with her weight.
Right.
I want to become someone who is not afraid to start her own business and yet isn't going to gain 50 pounds because I'm going to stress eat my way through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that. We are so aligned in so many ways. So Sherry, let me ask you to kind of come to a close here. What advice would you give someone who, so by the way, for my listeners, it will be in the show notes where you can find Sherry on Instagram and YouTube. She has amazing workouts. This is what I love about seeing you on Instagram is you have these little like doable snippets of like, you can do this workout today. And I love it. I'm actually going on vacation next week and I have saved one of yours that I'm like, I can do this in the hotel room.
Oh, nice.
I know I can do this to keep my strength up. You have to
send me photos, Leah, when you do it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah, I'll try to set up the phone. But so she has it's amazing resource that you really offer there, because the workouts that you're doing, to me at least, seem really accessible. Like you make them accessible to people, but yet, as I was saying, you and I were talking before we started recording, when you see Sherry, you have to go see her. When you see Sherry, you're going to be like, oh man, that lady is like so strong. She's so fit. And so I would imagine that sometimes people are going to see you and they're going to be like, oh, I could never do that. What do you tell people when they do want to get in shape? They do want to feel strong. They do want to feel fit. They probably want to look like you. What do you tell them in terms of not getting discouraged in the beginning?
Right. Yeah, I think it ties on to sort of what we were talking about before, identity, right? Whatever we think about ourselves, whoever we think we are right 100% of the time. And this is actually what I see as being the greatest block for many of my athletes. And I just want to clarify why I use the word athlete so much is because athlete is a mindset. And a lot of us think an athlete is a person who is professionally paid millions of dollars a year to appear on TV and to play for these teams, right? And it's not the case. An athlete is a person who does not diet or exercise. An athlete is a person who's focused on these activities as part of who they are. So they show up to work out because it's just part of what they do. It's part of becoming the person. And they choose to eat certain foods because that's what fuels their training and their recovery. And so for anyone who is watching, I do have a few tips, but my greatest one is really just stepping into that place of belief. And I would even say that diet and exercise are about 20 or 30% of your transformation. The rest of it is what you believe that you can achieve. And so most people, they'll hire a trainer, they're investing in a trainer, they're seeing a nutritionist or a dietitian or whatever, and they're not seeing results. But it's because the whole entire time they're hyper fixated on the fact that this won't work. Maybe they're still stuck on the past experiences of trying all of these different diets that never worked for them. And so now why the heck would this work this time? And so they're in that place where they already don't believe that success will happen. And if we're in that place, then yeah, it won't happen, because subconsciously, and coming back to that self-sabotage, subconsciously, we choose actions throughout our day to support our identity. So if I believe that I'm a person who can, then subconsciously, I will do actions throughout my day to support that fact. But if I believe that I can't, then I will find a way to self-sabotage because that's who I believe that I am. And so my only secret really was I started that 20 some years ago and I never stopped. And I've had 2 kids, I've trained through pregnancies. I've trained after giving birth. My firstborn, that was a very, very complicated delivery. I was actually hemorrhaging. I lost a lot of blood, and I found ways to adapt and train through it. I've put my back out many times. I've had other injuries. I've put my shoulder out. I last year tore my calf muscle. But it's about consistency. And so to create transformation, it's not about intensity. It's not about how much exercise I'm doing. I'm pretty busy too, Leah. Like I don't have hours in my day to train. I've got kids, I'm working, I'm traveling, I'm doing all kinds of stuff, and I have a household to take care of. So if I can fit in 15, 20 minutes, that's amazing. And that's generally what my training looks like. And then, starting something with that in mind, that this is going to be long term, that I don't have a set date as to when I need to release X number of pounds or when I need to look a certain way, but instead starting this as, this is who I am. This is the person I'm wanting to become. Yes. I'm a morning person, even though in my mind, I could never wake up in the morning. I decided I'm a morning person. I'm going to wake up a little bit today, and then build on that tomorrow and build on that tomorrow. But most of us, we start off thinking about intensity. We go from, I don't train at all, to next week I'm going to train 5 days a week. It's going to be for an hour. Then I'm going to go for an hour walk. And then I'm going to cut out carbs. And then I'm going to, right? And then how sustainable is that? That doesn't work.
Right.
But the brain needs feedback, and it needs feedback around success and around winning. And so if my commitment, and this is going to sound silly for many people that are listening, but if my commitment is tomorrow, I'm going to work out for 5 minutes, and I make it happen. And then the day after, it's 5 minutes. And then when that feels that I've mastered it, now it's going to be 6 minutes. And then I'm slowly going to work my way up to 20 minutes, so that even if it takes me 3 or 4 months, I have so comfortably worked up to 20 minutes that now it's a part of who I am.
Yes.
And I didn't go from 0 to 100. I took small bite-sized pieces of my ultimate goal, becoming 1% better every day. And the same thing with nutrition. If I want to shift my nutrition, I'm not going to think about elimination first. I'm going to get curious, and I'm going to start with addition. Well, what would happen if I added more water? What would happen if I added more salad, maybe? Well, what would happen? And just keep adding. And then slowly the change will happen, and in a very enjoyable way. So yeah, I get questioned a lot. How did you get a 6-pack? Or how long does it take to get that? Or how did, Leah, I've never once had that as a goal. I had a goal to be strong, because I was at a very, very many stages of my life, very, very weak and very vulnerable, and not feeling that I was even able to take care of myself. When I had my second back surgery in 2012, I moved into my mom's house. My youngest was potty training. She had to do all of that for me. I couldn't even make food for them. I couldn't even make food for myself. Oh, and so I come from that place of just wanting to feel empowered in my own body, that I'm capable. And so 20 some years ago, when I walked into the gym, I just started and never stopped. And that meant I had to be flexible, and it meant that I had to be adaptable. And some days my workouts are amazing and I crush them. And other days I'm practically crawling through them. Yeah. But I will still show up, right?
Oh my gosh, I have chills again. I don't think I've had chills this many times in an interview before. You are such an inspiration, Sherry. You really are. Okay, one final question, because I have a client, and I think her name is Lisa, and I think she would kill me if I had this opportunity to ask you and I didn't. So Lisa, she turned 50 this year. And Lisa lost 74 pounds working with me. She's amazingness. And Lisa goes on walks. Yeah. When we started together, she's like, I don't like exercise. I don't want to exercise. I was like, no problem, not required. She does walk now because she enjoys it. But now that she's 50, she's like, I know I really need to start strength training, and I really don't want to. And we've done motivation coaching. We've done all the things. And I think a lot of it is what you're talking about. I think a lot of times we go into it with, I don't want to do this. I hate this. I don't want to do this. I hate this. So even 5 minutes feels like torture. And I know what you're saying. It's about an identity piece of, I am someone who does this. Do you have any tips though for somebody who really wants to strength train, but they really don't want to do it?
Right. That's a great question. So it's going to come down to our why, right? And I think it's what we were talking about a little bit earlier. If my why is around releasing weight, if my why is around that number that I want to get to, that's not a strong enough driving force for me, right? So, but if my why instead is around, I don't want to have osteoporosis, or I know people around me who, suffered from certain conditions, especially if it was my family members, and I don't want to do that. Or I envision my future being able to hike, or to be able to play with my grandkids, whatever it is. It's very individual. That is a much stronger driving force. And oftentimes, many of us hate exercise because we have a negative association from it, from a past experience. I had an athlete I was working with, and it was, for the first few months, it was like pulling teeth. I would give her an exercise. There was a complaint, rolling eyes. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do this. Until finally she admitted to me that when she was in high school, she was chosen and voted as the most unathletic. And she was actually, there's a photo of her in her yearbook, and she was voted as the most unathletic. And so that stuck with her. Right, I know. And let me tell you now, Leah, I've been working with her now for, I think, going on to 5 years. She's one of the most inspirational women I've ever met in my life.
Really?
I have to actually tell her, okay, I'm going to say her name. She might kill me too, but I have to tell her, Evie, you have a fever. Like, stay home. Like, I'm the last to actually tell her, don't come, where we're way around. But it was the moment we sort of broke through that place, right?
Yeah.
And so it's about changing that connection and that relationship with exercise. First of all, let me choose the right one, because there's many tools. I want to choose something that I enjoy. And then I want to just maybe start with 1 minute or 2 minutes. Again, 1% better every single day. And then change why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this because I'm hating my body through it. I'm so ashamed of how I look. I want to change how I look. No, I'm doing this because I want to be strong. I want to go up and down the stairs when I'm 70 and I don't want help going to the washroom when I'm 80. And I just want to be completely self-sufficient until my last moment. And that's my driving force that I'm sharing with you. So changing that meaning.
I love that. That reminds me of, one of the reasons I love Pilates is because it strengthens everything. Amazing. Right. And it's the stability. And one of the teachers, her background is physical therapy. So she's always talking about how what we're doing is strengthening our grip, which is going to matter when we're 70. And it's strengthening our wrist and our ankles. So when we trip, we maybe don't fall, right? Or if we do fall, we don't get as hurt. And to me now at the age of 44, I think about that when I'm doing Pilates. And so when it gets really hard, when we're doing something, it's burning, my glutes are burning. I tell myself, this is the thought I tell myself as I say, this is so important. This is so important. Like, it's important that it burns. This is so important, because what I'm thinking about is I am thinking about my future self. I am thinking about the 70-year-old me. My mom just shared with me in her washing machine, she used to turn the water off. If she wasn't using the washing machine, she would actually turn the actual water source off. And this last time I went to visit her, my mom is 76, but this last time I went to visit her, and she does aerobics, she's working out, but I went to visit her and I said, hey, your water isn't turned off on your machine. She said, I can't turn the knob anymore. And of course, eventually at some point this will happen to all of us, but it just struck me. I was like, I want to be able to turn the knob when I'm 76, and not a criticism of my mom. She exercises, but I'm just saying it's one more motivator for me, right? Where I'm like, I want to turn the water knob, when I'm 70, it keeps me going. It keeps me going. Sherry, you are wildly inspirational. I want everyone to know you. So where can they find you?
Oh, thank you so much, Leah. We're going to hang out at some point. We're going to connect in person one day.
We are. Absolutely. I've never been to Montreal. I need to come.
Let's do it.
Amazing.
So Instagram at Sherry Shaban Fitness, also on Facebook at Sherry Shaban Fitness. And my YouTube channel is Sherry Shaban Fitness. And then if you want to email me, it's sherry@sherryshaban.com. And I'm always a resource for you. I also have a podcast, Fall in Love with Fitness, where you're going to meet Leah and hear her interview as well. And then a lot of topics along the same line.
Yes. And I so strongly want to encourage people, because your website, I think it was your website that I was on, but it's full of resources. It's not just exercise. You've got great recipes on there and you have so many resources. When I met Sherry, I was like, you must have a huge team of people helping you. She's like, nope, I did this myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, so many good resources, yummy recipes that are super wholesome and good for you. So thank you so, so much for coming on the show today, Sherry. I've so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. Me too, Leah. Thank you.
Yay.
You've been listening to The Life You Crave. I lost 30 pounds years ago without dieting, willpower, or deprivation. I'm on a mission to help other women, including you, do the same. You can book a free weight loss strategy session with me over at leahpinelli.com. That's LIAPINELLI.com. See you on our next call or on the next episode. And remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on iTunes.